Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kyle Shoemaker. I'll be giving the webinar today. A couple of housekeeping items. You should see a Q&A button in the control panel on your screen. So if you have any questions, make sure you ask them there. We'll answer those at the end. We are recording this and it will be available to you to view afterwards. So yeah, and we'll also make the slides available. So that way, if you want a copy of the slides, you can have that as well. So with that being said, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So hopefully everyone's seeing my screen and the slides. So this is going to be our introduction to ClusterVisor 1.0. This will be kind of a quick overview, trying to keep it around 30 minutes, so that way it doesn't take all of your time today. Yeah. So we'll start with, we're calling it 1.0, but the version numbering is a little different and starting in this version. So we're going to be releasing versions with a numbering scheme like you see here as an example here, where there is a major release, a year number, the month, and then the build number. So anything released in April of this year will be a 1.23.04 release. Next month's will be a 1.23.05. We probably won't release a new version every month, but as this is a brand new release, there'll be some minor updates coming along. We are going to keep kind of compatibility on the whole major version scheme. So if you have the 1.0 version install, it will be an easy DNF update between the same major version. We'll limit and try to make no breaking changes during that time period. But when moving from the 0.5 version or the going to the future 2 version, there will probably be some additional steps as part of the upgrade. So it won't be quite as simple as just a YUM upgrade or a DNF update. So now we'll get into what is ClusterVisor. So ClusterVisor is our custom-made, internally developed cluster management tool that'll allow you to deploy, provision, manage, monitor, and maintain your HPC compute cluster. So we built this with kind of years of feedback from customers and support that we've done for customers and understand really what they need, and we try to build a tool kind of around that. So what's new? So the 1.0 is a pretty significant upgrade from their original version. So there's a completely new and improved stats engine, a revamped web UI. We now integrate directly with SLURM, node provisioning enhancements, and a whole lot more. There really is nothing in ClusterVisor that wasn't touched and updated in this release. It's a pretty massive update, and we're pretty happy with the changes we made, and hopefully you guys will be as well. So these are the main topics we're going to go over today. So these are kind of the main tentpole features and features that we wanted to highlight. So we'll start with the flexible delivery options that are now with the 1.0 release. And what we mean by flexible delivery is we really have 2 different options on how we're installing ClusterVisor. One, we can install it on a head node, or we can install it on a dedicated ClusterVisor appliance node. Head node installation is kind of a traditional approach, which most people are used to, where your head node is used for managing a cluster. And on smaller systems, it's generally a login node as well. What we've done with this release is have kind of a customized version of ClusterVisor that's really for a dedicated system that's an appliance. And we'll go over a little bit detail on the appliance here in a second. But the idea is to provide a dedicated system just for running ClusterVisor. So why would you want an appliance? So one of the main features of the appliance is from a disaster recovery standpoint. We found that lots of people don't have the other resources or planned for backups and things like that. So because the ClusterVisor appliance now holds all of the images for your whole system, that now you can not only reinstall nodes, compute nodes, which you used to easily be able to do before, you can now reinstall your head node, your login node, storage nodes, etc. So it makes it really easy to get back up and running if there are any issues with your system. So also isolates processes so that users generally have access to your login nodes. And if ClusterVisor is running there, they can run something that will cause the system to run slow or cause some kind of issues. Now we separate these completely, and that the appliance is kind of an admin-only device and users don't log into it. And also from a maintenance standpoint, all the appliances we deliver are identical. So it's really easy to get them the standardized software stack, standardized set of hardware. So really easy to get up and running, and replacements if necessary, because it is a standardized kind of device. So what is the appliance exactly? It's a 1U that was built kind of and optimized for running ClusterVisor. We can easily support up to hundreds of nodes. So we're doing a 200+ node cluster now on it. So minimal lockdown version of Rocky Linux 9 with a dedicated web GUI. So it will have a kind of a standardized software stack installed. All of your data or the customer data is stored on the removable drives on the front of the appliance. So if there is a failure of the appliance, you can pop the drives out, stick them in a new appliance, you're back up and running again. It's also much lower cost compared to standard head nodes. So it is kind of a cost-reduced system. But it also runs all of the important things to make your cluster work, like DHCP, DNS, PXE, LDAP, node provisioning, monitoring, alerting. So when we look at like how we would configure this appliance in a network kind of design, so our preferred method would be that the ClusterVisor appliance sits on the corporate or university network, just like a login node would. And again, this is the entry point for admins. So only administrators would have access here. It can be really locked down and only allowing the web interface and SSH, where the login node is more the entry point for the users. And this isn't an absolute necessity, but we really encourage this kind of a configuration. So that way, if you need to power control or reinstall a login node, you can still log in and do that. So this is kind of our standard idea of how you would deploy the appliance. So moving along, the next major feature that we want to highlight is configuration management. So ClusterVisor becomes kind of the point of truth for the entire cluster, and it stores all of the configuration for the entire system. So, and there's an easy to use kind of web GUI, as well as command line tools to kind of manage that for you. So everything in the configuration is stored as a series of collections, and each collection has a unique schema of data that is stored. And then they're not only hardware elements, but they're software configurations and other features inside of ClusterVisor as well. So for example, here we have this global config collection, which has all of the configuration for the entire system. Global levels, configuration options, appliance for any appliance nodes, nodes for your nodes, network boot options, cloner images, disk layouts, switches, chassis, devices, monitoring roles, etc. So all of this is stored in this centralized database as part of ClusterVisor. So, and again, managed completely from a web GUI. So the web GUI we recommend from a new user perspective because it's really easy to find the fields and what's all possible. But the command line is definitely there for you as well once you're familiar with ClusterVisor a little bit. It's a little quicker to edit, but it does present all of the configuration as YAML from the command line perspective. So if you're familiar with YAML, it's pretty easy to set up and go with that. So with this configuration data, we have a series of what we call configuration plugins. So the configuration plugins are what takes the data that's stored inside of ClusterVisor and actually commits that to the nodes. So in my example here, we have a networking plugin that takes all of the networking configuration entered inside of ClusterVisor and actually writes the configuration files specifically for networking on the node. So this would set up IP addresses, gateways, all of that kind of stuff. So, and you as an administrator can decide which plugins you want to enable or disable depending on what you want ClusterVisor to manage. So, for example, we do have a cronny plugin that will set up a time server, but if you have a very advanced time server configuration that our configuration inside of ClusterVisor doesn't take into account, you can just disable that plugin and configure cronny like you would do by hand. So it really gives you the most flexibility. And so that way, we're not forcing you to do things the ClusterVisor way for certain things if you don't want to. But if you don't know how to configure something or just want something set up and easy, you can enable the plugins and it will do it all for you. So the big takeaway here that is if no plugins are enabled, no configuration changes will ever be done. So you can always count on that you have to explicitly enable ClusterVisor of making configuration changes on your cluster. So speaking of plugins, we have a wide list so far of plugins. So as I mentioned, there's cronny for setting that up. There's setting up EFI boot, so the network boot or the boot order will be correct on the nodes. File syncing, so you can sync individual files between nodes. Managing the host file, setting up IPMI, configuring this fully configures the BMC's networking users, everything. Setting up LDAP authentication, setting up an NFS server. SLURM configuration can completely be done via the web GUI as well. Managing SSH, as well as other things like sudoers and limits and lmod and SELinux and serial console, etc. All these plugins are kind of a Python module and completely extensible. So if there are other configuration things that need to be managed and you would like to extend ClusterVisor, we can certainly provide you information on how to do that. So you can build your own plugins to manage other configuration as well. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the big features and changes is our statistics and monitoring system in this release. So we had it in previous releases, and but it wasn't very featureful, and we spent a lot of time and effort really refining that. So, and it is significantly changed in this 1.0 release. So, like I said, it's completely revamped. Lots of bug fixes, better retention, way better UI elements of actually being able to kind of dig down into these statistics. And then the monitoring rule engine is completely revamped as well. So first, I want to talk a little bit about history and monitoring over here on to the right side. And that we use a kind of a time series collection method so that we collect stats every 30 seconds from all of the devices. And we keep that level of detail for 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks, we keep data at a 5-minute interval for a period of 2 months. After 2 months, we keep it at a 15-minute interval for 3 months. And then after that, it's 1-hour intervals for the last 5 years. So as you're looking at stats, if it's relatively recent in time, you have very detailed and very precise measurements. As time goes on, the time period you're looking at stats, looking at something that happened a month ago, 2 months ago, last year, the level of granularity of data, it becomes a little less granular. We did this to kind of save disk space and make this not kind of grow completely out of control. So with these stats that we're collecting, again, this is a completely plugin architecture as well. A different set of plugins run for stat collection. So any stat that we collect can be turned into a monitoring rule. So for example, we can create rules like if the node is down, a temperature is too high, a RAID array is degraded. And then once a rule becomes positive, then you can do kinds of actions like sending emails, running scripts. There's a full history of the stats. You can compare stats among nodes. You can create custom dashboards, which we'll go over in a few minutes. But here are the kind of stat collection plugins that we currently have. There's a CPU one, which gives you all kinds of details on the CPU. This is a ClusterVisor specific one on the version of ClusterVisor installed on the nodes. Disks, so this is information about actual disk usage as well as I/O on disks, firmware information, InfiniBand specific information about Intel SSDs, including like wear level, IPMI, which gets you temperature, fans, voltage. We do software RAIDs, hardware RAIDs, memory, kind of standard networking things, as well as pulling directly from NVIDIA GPUs. We can get power utilization, memory utilization on each GPU. System-wide power consumption is also a stat that can be collected, as well as kind of system-level stuff about kernel version and uptime. And once these stats are here, the web UI now has a complete graphing engine that is significantly enhanced from previous versions. So here you can see some, the next couple of slides are just some screenshots of kind of the data and graphs you can get out of the system. So again, we have able to collect CPU power consumption, as well as node power consumption. So I/O on the disks. So here you can see at this point in time, there's a lot of write I/O, so you can really kind of narrow down what's going on the system, as well as all kind of fans and metrics like that. So with these stats, again, as I mentioned, you can do health checks based on these stats. So, so any stat can be turned into a monitoring rule. You make as many rules as you want, and some other examples like we mentioned earlier. Part of the monitoring rules are they run so every 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds we do data collection on the nodes and then store those, and then there is a full rules editor available in the web GUI. It's also available from the command line, where you can do pretty advanced sets of rules. You can do multiple ands, ors, groupings, as well as a test button. So as you're building these rules, you can really understand what's going on. So, and you can do customizable actions, like I said, running emails or running scripts. So the idea of running scripts is if you had a rule that, you know, something was wrong with the node, you could run a script that would take it out of SLURM, for example, or reboot the node if you wanted to. And you can choose to run those scripts on the system that was the rule failed on, or you can choose to run that rule like on a head node or any other node on your cluster. So it's pretty helpful in being able to kind of self-manage the cluster. Along with the rules, there's full history of them, so you can go back in time and see what rules have failed and when and why. So it's also one of the things that we do is take a full snapshot of all the stats on the cluster when a rule fails. We do this from a standpoint of if node 1, or for example, were to fail, we take the last amount of data we had on node 1 and all of the snapshot of the stats at that point in time. So you can go back and look and see what was the memory utilization, what was the CPU utilization, what was the temperatures, you know, and so hopefully help you understand why a node would go down. Coming soon, we're adding some more features, and that would be the ability to collect data from non-node devices. Right now, stats are collected via a daemon that runs on the node, but we're working on integrating into other devices as well, like PDUs, UPSs, switches, external storage arrays, so that way we can get a more holistic view of the entire system. We're also building a set of command line tools so that you can insert your own stats. So if you have something specific that is in your environment, if you can run a command line tool to insert the stat, you'll be able to do it. There will also be a Python API that you can use to insert those stats as well. So along with the rules and the stats come how do you visualize them. We showed a little bit before on visualizing them via kind of graphs, but we can also do interesting visualization with rack diagramming. So ClusterVisor before had rack diagramming, but it was a pretty tedious process to create and edit, lots of editing of text and stuff like that. So this release completely revamps the web-based rack diagramming tools. So it's completely drag and drop now. You can see here's an example of a 3-rack system, and then devices here that are unracked. You can click and drag them and put them wherever you want in the rack. These are multi-node systems, so 2U4 nodes, so you can actually put nodes inside. So it gives you lots of flexibility of being able to kind of visualize your cluster as it actually is. The rack diagrams are useful, but where we think it becomes really useful is you start applying stats to the rack diagrams. So in this example here, we have a multi-node system where showing a CPU temperature. So now we can create heat maps of CPU temperature or any other stat you have. So any stat that's collected, as I showed earlier, there's plugins for a bunch of different stats. So you can start to visualize that kind of data on a rack by rack basis and really understand, is there a problem with your data center, or which nodes are utilized, which ones aren't. It's a really nice feature. And again, you can customize all of that. So the next big feature that we've been working on and really felt was a really important feature in this version is our integration with SLURM. So, ClusterVisor can now pull data directly from your SLURM install. So we don't duplicate any data. We use the SLURM REST API that was released a few versions ago inside of SLURM. So we can pull data from the control daemon as well as the SLURM DVD. So that gives us full accounting information on the cluster. So this example, the screenshot here, we're showing current jobs. So you can see the current jobs, the utilization of the cluster, the allocated cores, memory, the partitions, all of that kind of stuff from a nice web interface. We can also do a full history, so you can query back in time and seeing all of the jobs throughout time. We give you kind of a nice little time series graph up here at the top. So you can see how long a job is queued and run and which nodes they run on. All of that kind of information is here in the job details. But I think where we find the most value is in the integration of the stats from ClusterVisor as well as the integration of job data from SLURM. So when you look at a job inside of ClusterVisor, we now know which nodes the job ran on, we know the time period the job ran, and then we can start showing you data and graphs that correlate with that. So in my little example here, we're showing that this job ran on a 24 node. You can see where it ran on 24 devices over here. And then here is the graph of CPU utilization and memory utilization during the job run. So this is very helpful for when a user comes and tells you their job failed or wasn't running correctly or ran slowly. You can really dig down and understand the stats and the details of the job. Not only the data that SLURM gives you, but also all the other data we collect. So these are just examples about CPU and memory, but it can be temperatures, it can be disk IO, it can be anything that you want. So you can really dig down and understand what's going on while a job is running. So with all of the stats and rack diagrams and SLURM data, how do you look at all of it? And with that, we created a fully customizable dashboard system. So there's a web GUI. You can make as many dashboards as you want. It's completely editable via the web GUI as well, via kind of a drag and drop kind of interface. So you can decide which stats are important for you. You can look at stats on a group basis, on a node basis, or the cluster as a whole. So, and again, you can make as many dashboards as you want. So you can have dashboards that are for the cluster, and then you can also have dashboards at a device level. So if you wanted to see certain stats when you're looking at your storage node, you can highlight those stats differently from the stats that you would want to see on a compute node, for example. So we have these ideas of widgets that you add to your dashboard. So we have tables, graphs, gauges, rack diagrams, and scheduler info. So on these dashboards, you can customize it by adding a table of whatever data is important or graphs and gauges. So you can really kind of customize that look and feel however you want. Dashboard also is more than just looking at data. It has some interactive features as well. You can see on this screenshot, there's a couple of tabs here, one for running commands and one for power control. So in this example, we're running across 3 nodes as root and the command date, and you can see it presents the output. So an easy way to run kind of parallel commands across nodes. The power control tab gives you the ability to power control the nodes via running SSH and running like reboot or power off on the nodes, or also has full IPMI control. So if you have nodes that have failed and you need to hard power cycle, you can do all of that directly from the web GUI. So also another feature that we've had in the past is provisioning, but it's been updated fairly significantly now in this release. So our provisioning system is something we call Cloner. It has existed in the past. The way it worked before is you would install a node, configure it how you like, and then pull that image from the node and then deploy it onto existing nodes. All of that kind of feature still exists, but we've added some new tools along with that. So one of the things that we did a while ago in Cloner, but I think it's worthwhile to re-mention, is that we keep the installed image and the disk layout as 2 completely separate items. So the image that is installed in the operating system that runs on the node is separate from the disk configuration. So if different hardware, you can use one image in multiple places. We also support multicasting of images to nodes, so you can simultaneously install tens to hundreds of machines simultaneously. And you can go from a bare metal to a working node in just a few minutes. But what we added in this release is we now support all of the EL8 and EL9 distros, Rocky, Red Hat, Alma, etc. And we also added the ability to create images from scratch instead of having to install a node via the distro installer first. So we have an ability for you to upload an ISO of a distro, and then from that ISO, be able to deploy an image that can then be put on the nodes. So we have a series of templates, what we call them roles here, where they're node, login, storage, etc. So to make an image of Rocky 9, so we've previously uploaded the Rocky 9 distro here. We set the role, we call it a name, and we hit the create image button. And a few minutes later, you'll have a fully working image that can be deployed to your nodes with Rocky 9. So combined with the appliance, as we mentioned earlier, we can now install your login node, your storage nodes, and everything directly from the appliance via this method. So, so it's really easy to get do OS upgrades. Appliance can be shipped with the right distros already preloaded on them, and then it can be point and click your way to installing a login node or head node or storage node to get your whole cluster up and running. We spent a lot of time on this as well about doing non-internet connected systems. We have customers in highly secure environments that don't have access to the internet. With this idea of being able to upload an ISO, it really removes the need to connect to the internet and download and configure things that way. So it makes it a lot simpler to deploy into kind of highly secured environments. And because the appliance is separate, you can always take an image of your node. You can take as many images you want at whatever intervals you want, so that you can have backups of your login node or your head node, and keep a copy of them in case there's some kind of failure, whether that's a hardware failure or a software misconfiguration, or whatever that may be. So, and again, major feature of the appliance is not only being able to restore the compute node, but the login and the storage nodes as well. Moving on to the user management features. So full web and command line GUI for managing users. So if you'd like the ClusterVisor appliance or ClusterVisor install on your login node, we'll run a LDAP server for you. So you have an internal LDAP server as part of the cluster. With that, we have the full GUI to manage all your users and groups. So we also have tools to help make home directories, SSH keys, add users to the SLURM accounting database, etc. If you don't want to use our LDAP, that's fine. We have, again, it's a plugin architecture, so we allow you to use your existing LDAP. This version has made some changes, so you can set up a lot of your existing LDAP infrastructure via the web GUI as well. So depending on how complicated your LDAP setup is, but it does allow full option of either the local LDAP on your ClusterVisor server or on your existing campus network. So there's also full access control inside of ClusterVisor itself. So we have a concept of administrators inside of ClusterVisor. So if a user is given administrator privileges, they can log into ClusterVisor and make configuration changes, edit the dashboards, make users, etc. And there's also full administrator or full sudo control if you want to do privilege-based access control and login and compute nodes. So again, there's a plugin to help you manage sudo from a GUI and deploy that evenly and consistently across all of your nodes. The last major feature we wanted to highlight here is the command line tools. Again, everything kind of previously, we've talked a lot about doing things from the web GUI, but we realize these are Unix systems and lots of us prefer command line versions of things. So we have tons of command line tools that do most of the things the web interface does. So we preface them all with CV to help them be easily locatable and findable. So there's commands like cvconf to do configuration changes, cvexec to run commands in parallel across the cluster, cvnetboot to change how they boot, cvpower to do power control of nodes, cvsensors to get IPMI sensors. CVSSH key is a tool to help manage and check SSH configurations so that they're correct. There's a diagnose mode here even to make sure all the permissions are right on SSH keys and things like that. So it's pretty helpful. CV stats, so you can query all the stats from the command line. CV user admin, so you can manage the user and LDAP database. DB image, so we can make backup copies of ClusterVisor. We do this on a nightly basis automatically for you, but if you ever need a backup copy, you can dump the entire ClusterVisor database and redeploy it onto a new system. This also dumps your entire LDAP tree at the same time if you're running our LDAP server, so it's a really easy way to migrate to a different box or to do backups. So with that, we're going to go into kind of running out of time here. So I'm going to go quickly here to a case study that we have. So Caltech was one of an early install. So they've been using the 1.0 release for a while. Once they got it, they started deploying their own dashboards. They really like the web-based management and the rack layout tools. There's a quote here from Ivan, a postdoc at Caltech, basically saying the SLURM integrations have been very helpful for them to being able to track the RAM usage of their jobs. That's something they haven't ever had before. So, and it's really providing them a lot of insight into how their jobs are running and their development process for the software that they're using. So, as far as next steps, so you can go to our webpage, and then we will be following up with a much more technical deep dive webinar about all of the features inside of the ClusterVisor 1.0, really highlighting each feature, how you do a lot of things. So that will be following in the next month or so, as well as a document on how to upgrade to 1.0 if you have a previous version. We built a migration tool, so it is a pretty painless process, but there are a few steps involved. As I said, that it is not a perfect yum update from one version to another. And you can talk to us about adding it to your existing cluster if you don't already have one. There's a mailing list as well. So it's a really low volume ClusterVisor Announce mailing list. We post here every time we make an update and produce a new RPM. So if you're not subscribed, I highly recommend it. So again, we're going to send out these slides afterwards so you can click on a link instead of having to remember this long URL. But now we'll go into Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to submit them now. So I got one here about stats and monitoring. Is this collected via custom daemon? Does it take much CPU? Okay, and yes, there is a custom daemon. So we have a daemon that runs on every node called CV Client D that runs on all the compute nodes, and it does do the data collection. It does not take much CPU usage. Obviously, there is a little bit because it is doing data collection of stats. It sends the data every 30 seconds to the management server, and it does do it over the management network and not the high-speed network. So I hope that answers all of your questions there, Brady. So and another question here, and how does one get ClusterVisor on our app cluster? Is it a licensed product? So ClusterVisor is included in for customers that buy clusters from us. So if you buy a turnkey cluster, ClusterVisor is part of the product. So if you have an existing cluster, then you can talk to us about getting it. If you do not have an existing cluster of ours, you can talk to us and we can give you some information on what that would look like of deploying it to an existing system. Can it be deployed on our head node alongside the existing suite of act_ products? Yeah, it should be able to work on existing clusters. It sounds like you have an existing system, Marco. If it is older, currently we only support CentOS 8 and 9 or EL 8 and 9, I guess I should say. So if your system is still on 7, you would probably need an operating system update. Our goal in ClusterVisor is to support the current version of an EL release and the previous one. So 7, unfortunately, is not supported on the latest versions. Is there any stat collection to NFS related to get insight into users' usage of network file systems? Yes, we do have some stats on NFS. So we definitely have some IO information as well as some of the calls, but I'm not sure we don't have it broken down by user because I'm not sure that's really available to capture, but we do have some information on NFS. And if there is something like that where you would find more stat collection being useful, contact us. We're happy to look into that to see so of what that would look like, of what we can collect and how we can extend the stats collection. All right, so I have another question here. What's the dry run time for testing config change, say over 300 nodes? So it depends on which configuration change you're talking about. If you're just changing some settings on the node, like changing what the time server is or something like that, I mean, the changes are deployed pretty immediately. Or so what happens, the way that works is when you make a configuration change, they get put into a queue of changes that need to be pushed to the nodes, and then you get to decide when you want to push those changes. So so that way, if you're making a network change, for example, it wouldn't interrupt a running job. And so you can hit that button when you're ready, or tell it to commit the changes. It will in parallel send requests to all the nodes to update and make that change. If you're talking about kind of a reinstallation of the entire operating system from that kind of a change, so once you have the image ready for a new operating system or a bunch of new software installed and you want to deploy that to a node, it takes about 15 minutes or so to reinstall a whole system. It could be a little less, a little more, depending on the size of the image. And you can do that in parallel, again, via multicast. So you can do lots of nodes kind of in the same time period. So we got a question here about, does ClusterVisor support Pixie booting nodes for diskless setups? So it is on our roadmap to do completely diskless nodes. We are working on that now, but it is not finalized at this point. So we understand that is definitely a request. So, but it is not available as of this release. But we'll keep you updated once we do have that up and running. So we do have a plan in place to do it. And that we use the existing images, and so you will be able to kind of simultaneously run diskful and diskless images on the same system if you want, and flip between them by just changing a couple of things. So as soon as we get that done, we'll certainly make another announcement about that. And I get another question, are plugins downloaded through web interface or some other method? So the plugins are all come pre-installed on the system. So, and it's up to you to enable or disable them via the GUI per node basis. So you can decide which nodes have which plugins enabled. So we do have a few plugins that are available as a separate RPM, and that would be our intention of the way we would deploy new or experimental plugins in the future, is they would come as RPM packages, and they wouldn't necessarily be available from the web interface. So I think I have hit all of the questions. So again, we wanted to make this a kind of a quick introduction. And for those that are interested, we will be doing follow-up webinars with a lot more details, showing you how you make configuration changes, all of that kind of stuff. And so we will do that. I get another question here. Can one clone a manual config change from one client node to another? Yes. So you can easily make a manual config change on one node to another. So you can do it. You can copy files around, or you can take an image from a node and deploy that image back to another node. There's multiple different ways you can achieve that. So, but yes, you can definitely make config changes from one client node to another. Okay, well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions. So I think we appreciate everyone for attending and listening to us on this new release. We're really pretty excited about it. If you have any questions, something we didn't cover, or want a one-on-one demo, we're happy to do that and answer anything specific you may have. So you can reach out to your sales rep if you already know one, or if not, send an email to this info@advancedclustering.com address. We'll happily address that. If you're an existing customer and would like to upgrade, let us know as well, and we'll work on, we're ready to start moving people from the 0.5 to the 1.0 release as well. So if we can work with you and schedule some downtime, and we'll help you get that going. So again, I appreciate everybody's time today, and thanks for attending.